With the Seraph interlude coming out right around the corner, that means that all of the Sakura faces are going to be going up on rate up, well, save for one that we may be getting in a future event, because who knows what they're actually doing with Oku and Kama right now, but we don't gotta focus on that. We gotta worry about the Sakura faces that are right in front of us, and that is going to be Meltlilith, King Protea, and Passionlip that are coming out for the Seraph interlude and will be on a summoning campaign. So let's go ahead and talk about the first actual premium unit that's going to be coming out in Meltlilith. Now, Meltlilith is actually a really strong servant, not only because we're still technically in the Scotty meta for like 2 more weeks, but even outside being used with Scotty, she's actually just a really good servant in general. Like, she just does a lot of just good splashable things, meaning that she can just do a whole lot of just generic good stuff, which makes her good in a lot of different areas. There's not really a specific niche that you have to find with Meltlilith, because she just kind of does all of the good stuff you would want a standard DPS to do, with a few interesting things added in there for that extra bit of spice that makes her a really good servant. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start talking about Meltlilith and what I mean by starting off with her hits. Which the first thing you're probably going to notice is that her NP charge is insanely high at 0.92%. Meaning that even though her arts card, of which she only has 1, that only has 2 hits, even though it's a little bit on the weaker side, because her NP gain is so high, if you're getting crits on that arts card, you're going to refund like pretty much all of your NP. Especially so if you crit on the quick cards as well, which also have 4 hits on them, meaning she's pretty good when it comes to genning her own NP, as long as she's getting crits, which she is a quick servant, so that's not all that big of a deal. It's not that hard for her to do. Keep in mind that her quick cards are deceptively stronger than they look, because she does have a passive 8% buff for her quick cards. Her crits also might be a little stronger than you might think as well, because she does also have a passive 10% crit buff as well. So just keep those in mind. Her star gen is at 10.2%, and again, with 2 quick cards with 4 hits on them and an NP with 8 hits on it, you can actually gen a fair bit of stars with Meltlilith, as long as you keep getting those quick cards in those Brave Chains. Also, you can gen a fair bit of stars in just normal Brave Chains, because her extra attack, which is a composite card that gens stars, NP, and does big boy damage, has 6 hits on it, which you guys know that I love to see. Because not only is a 5-hit extra attack just absolutely OP, a 6-hit one is absolutely dummy broken. And she can actually take advantage of that for star genning and for getting that little bit of extra NP gain in Brave Chains, because her natural NP is so high. Meltlilith is actually one of those servants that if you wanted to invest in her append skill for the extra attack, you will see a little bit of value come back from that, because her natural NP gain and star gen are pretty high. Well, the NP gain more so than the star gen. The star gen is kind of like average, but the NP gain very high. With that being said, let's go ahead and transition over to the skills. Now, I'm going to show the buffed versions of all of Meltlilith's skills, just so like people on the NA version know what to expect that she's going to be able to do in the future, right? That way you can be aware that this servant gets even better. So starting off with skill 1, you have Meltlilith's essentially evasion and survivability skill, which gives her 2 hits of evasion that last for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. Then also provides 15 stars for her to start playing around with, and in the future will also give her a 30% NP battery, meaning with an append skill, she's compatible with like pretty much every single 50% startup charge CE, which is actually really broken. This means she can actually pick up a new role in the future as another farming servant in your toolbox. However, Meltlilith is particularly good to have in a toolbox because of her alter ego typing, because there are so many nodes that have like weird enemy numbers and they just have odd class placements. Like they might have like a rider and a caster and a saber or something like that. And Meltlilith being an alter ego means, well, if there's ever a node that just has one particularly big rider, caster, assassin, or berserker, she's going to be able to handle it for you because she already does really good damage. This just essentially helps her pick up that farming role without you needing like a maximum broken K-scope or normal K-scope with some shenanigans or some 50% CE and then having to use Scotty's battery on her. You know, it just avoids you having to do any of that because she can pick it up herself with any CE that starts her off with 50% NP as long as you also level up her append skill to, max level. The other parts of the skill are also very, very good as well, as that evasion skill is basically like a baby version of what Ku has, and as we know, Ku has a very, very broken dodge skill. This is definitely going to help your Meltlilith stay alive. It means she can pretty much dodge an NP plus an additional attack, which again is very, very strong, as a lot of bosses nowadays really just love to crit you for like 95% of your HP, so her having this skill in the back pocket is already really good, but in the future it's going to become insanely good. Her second skill is actually going to get buffed, or at least it should get buffed with this Seraph main interlude coming out. Originally, it just increases her attack by 30% for 3 turns, and then lowers her own defense by 10% for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, which isn't bad. I mean, it's a very, very good attack buff. A little annoying that it lowers her defense, but she also does have the first skill with the double dodge, and I just assume that they think it kind of like balances out in some way. But now they will buff this skill, so not only is it a 30% attack buff for 3 turns, but now she also gets an on attack buff that every time that she normal attacks, she gets a 15% crit damage buff for 3 turns. Meaning turn 1, if you just do a Brave Chain, you're already going to be stacking an insane amount of crit damage on Meltlilith, and this lasts for 3 turns. So like, let's say you're doing a solo or something, this crit damage could get out of control after the 2nd turn. Because if you're lucky enough to be doing like a solo with Meltlilith, this skill just keeps getting even better, because then you're doing like 4 attacks per turn, which gets pretty ridiculous very, very quickly. And it's already on a low 5-turn cooldown, meaning you can kind of spam it a lot as well. Things just get very gross with this skill, because originally Meltlilith was reliant on other people to give her crit damage because she didn't really have a way to buff her own crit damage. And even though she has that passive 10% buff, it's not really enough to make her crits like super, super good. But then they were like, nah, let's throw Melt this buff. And so, like, we could have just given her like a standard 50% crit damage buff for 3 turns, or standard 100% for 3 attacks for 3 turns. But what if we just let her go absolute sicko mode with it, right? And make it more rewarding based on how many attacks your Meltlilith gets, because this can definitely get very, very out of control very, very quickly. And keep in mind that it also like will apply in the middle of a turn. So let's say you attack 2 times in a chain, but your last card is a crit. You're still going to get those 2 buffs in the middle of the turn for at least 30%, right? And then it can allow that 3rd attack to take the crit damage. And then if you have a Brave Chain where all of the attacks are crits, they're just going to start getting stronger and stronger and stronger as each of those attacks connect. The only annoying thing is that they left the 10% defense down for 3 turns, but realistically, you should be fine. Between her first skill and any supports you might be using with her, they should be able to keep her alive and really make this a non-issue. But if you're doing a solo, because I think Melt is very fun to use for solos, you can rely on her first skill, or just hope she doesn't get crit into oblivion, because sometimes maybe that 10% may come up, like you may have barely lived a hit, and it can just be a little annoying for those corner cases. But for most everyday play, you really shouldn't see it come up. Then we move over to her final skill, which reduces all enemies' NP damage by 50% for 1 turn, and it reduces the party's NP damage by 50% for 1 turn as well, while also buffing her own NP damage by 30% for 2 turns. And this is on a nice 6-turn cooldown. Now, this skill is actually really good for her own survivability, especially after they buffed it. For those guys that didn't live in the Dark Age, this skill used to be delayed, kind of like Ishtar's attack buff, and it was only 20% NP damage. And then it only lasted for 1 turn on top of all of that. And so it was just a very big hassle skill to use. Now you get the NP damage buff immediately, which is really good, because that 30% NP damage is multiplying into that nice 30% attack buff on the 2nd skill. Because if you didn't know, different buff types in FGO actually multiply into each other, which is why you want your characters to have a nice, vast array of different types of buffs, right? You want like different card buffs, you want attack buffs, NP damage buffs, and special damage mods. You don't want characters that overemphasize one particular buff, right? But the other really good thing is that by lowering enemies' NP damage by 50%, that actually may allow your characters to live like an enemy NP when they otherwise would have died, especially if you can start combining it with other skills that also lower enemy attack or enemy NP damage. I'm not saying to entirely 100% believe that you're going to live an enemy NP, because some enemies are just going to hit you ridiculously hard and there is no hope of you living anyway, but essentially by lowering it by 50%, think of their damage getting cut in half. So if there's an NP that's like, oh man, it hit me for like 20k, obviously that was going to kill you every single time, but with this, that will now do like half the damage, 10k, which you can actually live with Melt because her HP, even without being grailed, is 13,000, right? So just some things to go ahead and consider. But again, I'm not advising anybody to just like let their Melt try to face tank NPs unless you're trying to see which NP she can tank, because, you know, that might be a little funny, but I do not condone Melt abuse, okay? Be nice to your Meltlilith. Anyway, going over to her NP, this is like really the last area I think they really need to buff Meltlilith, like not for the damage. In fact, all they really need to do on the NP is both of her effects, if they just proc first, she's going to be like one of the most broken servants in the game, because the effect she has on her NP is that she removes the enemies that she's attacking buffs after she attacks, and then she buffs her own quick performance by 10 to 30% after she uses her NP, right? If they make these both proc first, on that first NP you fire, you're going to have that quick buff multiplying into an attack buff multiplying into an NP damage buff, and even if you only have that base 10%, it's actually a little higher than that, because remember, she has a passive 8% quick performance, so really, you're starting off at bare minimum with an 18% quick buff multiplying into a 30% attack buff and then a 30% NP damage buff. So that would also like really help her damage out. It would help her looping ability just a little bit more, because then she could really take advantage of those initial 8 hits on the first NP to kind of help her loop and get back to her NP again. Although, really shouldn't be that big of a deal, because if you're doing like a quick chain, as people that have used Melt will know, she'll probably just loop her NP anyway. But the removing the enemy buffs, I really want to see this proc first, because it's why characters like Shura Amakusa are so infamous, because they just yeet all the enemy's buffs and then they do damage. It's like one of the strongest effects an offensive servant can have. It's just the only problem is that, like, when you don't do it beforehand, it almost feels like your NP's getting wasted, but you could still take some advantage of it with Meltlilith, because you can fire the NP, and then if you have crits following said NP, you can be assured that those crits are going to go in and get a nice clean hit in on the boss. Especially if you're using like double Scotty and you've like massively gassed up her quick cards and you're doing a quick chain, you got quick crits coming right after. You can remove like an enemy invincibility and then just obliterate them with some quick crits that are probably going to do more damage than the NP would anyway if you're using double Scotty, if I'm being honest. So there's some upsides and some downsides to it, you know. Obviously, we'd prefer if it activated first, but it's still not bad. You know, it's a very, very good thing to have on an offensive servant. I'm just kind of giddy with excitement thinking about them buffing her NP and just making both of these things proc first. And maybe even potentially giving her, like, a special damage mod or something. That would be a little dummy crazy. But let me know what you guys think of Meltlilith. I've had pretty much nothing but praise to say about this servant, just because, again, I think she's just built very well. She's just a strong servant overall. Like, again, everything that we've kind of gone over in this video, it's all just good stuff. There's really nothing wasted on this servant. After all of her buffs, they've pretty much fixed any areas I might want to complain about. And really the only place that I did complain about was her NP, that her effects don't proc first. But even then, her NP is so good that I'm kind of letting it slide a little bit. Especially because I'm hoping that in the future they'll just buff it anyway and they'll just fix that. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. You should be saving for Castoria, but there's definitely going to be that one guy. If you are that one guy, let me know if you're summoning for Meltlilith. And if the video was a catalyst for you, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe for daily FGO content. If you want more content, I stream every weekday over on my Twitch, and I upload videos exclusively for channel members if you click that join button. Finally, if you want to support the channel more than you already have by watching this video, you can download LD Emulator in the description down below, which allows you to play FGO at 120 frames per second, which I swear every time I stream on Twitch, people will come in and they'll be like, dang, the game looks so smooth, and I'm like, I know, I just discovered the 120 FPS myself. And it does look pretty good. You can also trust it because I use LD Emulator for both of my main accounts. So it's like, you're not going to get banned or anything for using it. So come enjoy 120 FPS with me and see each individual motion that the servants can make and whatnot. But yeah, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have just a nice day. Peace, late guys.